My wife's birthday gift to me cost her exactly $7. Not because she was broke, she'd been cashing commissions that would make most people blush, but because she'd already spent 18 of the $25 on the DoorDash gift card. She texted me on the time, morning of my 48th birthday. Ordered yourself something nice tonight. Figured you'd be at the restaurant anyway. Not love, Sandra. Not even happy birthday. Just the initial, cold as a business signature. I stood in the kitchen of my catering prep space, phone in one hand, spatula in the other, and read that message 3 times. $7. That was what she thought of 48 years of my life and 11 years of our marriage. I'm Marcus Cole. For the past 9 years, I've run Cole's Kitchen, a mid-size catering operation out of Fairview, North Carolina. Before that, I spent 12 years as a sous chef at restaurants that earned real recognition, places where I learned that food isn't just sustenance, it's the thing that holds people together at the table. I left that world to build something of my own, something I could pass down. Sandra always had a different word for it. Stubborn, impractical, small. We met when we were both 32. She was climbing fast in commercial real estate. I was building slowly in food service. For the first few years, she seemed to respect the difference. She'd bring clients to events I catered, brag about the food. Somewhere around year 6, the bragging stopped. The apologies started. My husband's in the food business. It's more of a passion project at dinner parties where everyone else seemed to have a title that came with a corner office. I heard her say it once at a neighbor's holiday party while I was refilling my own glass. She didn't know I was standing 3 feet behind her. The distance grew after I turned down a partnership offer from a larger catering chain that would have required me to relocate to Charlotte and essentially dissolve Cole's Kitchen into their brand. I said no. The kids were settled. Tyler was 14 and thriving on his high school's cross-country team. Ava was 9 and had just found her footing at a school with a gifted program that actually understood how her brain worked. She processed things differently, always had, and we'd finally found teachers who met her where she was. Uprooting them for a deal that would have erased everything I'd spent years building made no sense to me. Sandra saw it differently. You had a lifeline and you let it go, she said that night, her voice carrying the particular edge she reserved for conversations about money. That's so typical of you, Marcus. Always choosing comfortable over successful. Comfortable. That became the label. Our 4-bedroom house in a good school district. Comfortable. My reliable truck. Comfortable. My satisfaction in the work I did. Comfortable, comfortable, comfortable. I started to hear it the way you hear a drip in the ceiling, constant, low, wearing a hole in something you didn't know could be worn through. 6 months after the partnership rejection, Sandra landed an exclusive listing agreement with Langley Development Group, one of the most aggressive commercial real estate firms in the region. Brett Langley was the kind of man who entered a room like he'd already bought it. 52, silver-haired, the sort of handsome that came from a gym membership and a good tailor rather than anything God-given. He was Sandra's biggest client and, eventually, something more. I didn't need a private investigator to see what was happening. I had eyes. The perfume she wore to site visits. The way she laughed at her phone when she thought I wasn't watching. The weekend developer conferences in Asheville. I stayed quiet. Not because I was weak, but because I was watching. And I was working. What Sandra didn't know, what she'd never bothered to ask about, was that for the past 4 years, I'd been running a second operation alongside Cole's Kitchen. I called it Southern Ember, and I kept it entirely separate. It started as a ghost kitchen, just me and 2 part-time cooks working weekend nights, fulfilling delivery orders through every major app under a brand name that had nothing to do with Cole's Kitchen or Marcus Cole. I'd taken the dry rub formula I'd been perfecting for 20 years and built a menu around it. Slow-smoked brisket, pulled pork with a vinegar pepper finish, cornbread that people kept asking if it came from their grandmother's kitchen. Within 18 months, Southern Ember had a 4.8 rating on every platform, a 6-month waitlist for our catering arm, and a regional food magazine calling it the best BBQ operation in the Carolinas that most people had never heard of. I'd also filed 2 patents, one for the dry rub formula's preservation process and one for a modular smoking apparatus I designed that cut cooking time by 30% without sacrificing the bark. I'd been sitting on acquisition offers from 2 national food brands for the better part of a year. Sandra had walked past my home office 100 times while I took those calls. She never once asked what I was working on. She thought I was answering vendor emails. The birthday gift arrived, if you can call it that, on a Thursday in October. Sandra had left the night before for what she said was a weekend property tour in the mountains with a development team. She texted the DoorDash link at 7:43 in the morning while I was prepping for a corporate luncheon. I checked the card balance out of reflex. $18 had been used. The remaining balance was $7 and change. I set my phone down on the stainless steel prep table and looked at it for a long time. That evening, after the luncheon was wrapped and the van was unloaded, I came home to find Tyler sitting at the kitchen table with his geometry homework untouched in front of him. He was 17 now, broad-shouldered from 4 years of running, and had his mother's sharp features and my tendency toward silence. He looked up when I came in, and something in his face told me the conversation we were about to have wasn't about geometry. "Dad," he said, and then stopped. "What's going on, Ty?" He pushed the textbook aside. "I need to tell you something. I've been sitting on it for 2 months, and I can't anymore." He exhaled slowly. "I saw her back in August. She said she was at a client dinner. I drove past Harrington's on my way home from practice, and her car was in the lot. I went inside to say hi." He paused. "She was with Brett Langley. Not like a business dinner." "I know the difference, Dad. Ava doesn't know. I've been telling her mom's just really busy with work." My son had been carrying this for 2 months. 17 years old, protecting his little sister, sitting on something that should have been my burden to carry. I crossed the kitchen and sat down across from him. "How long have you known something was off?" "Before August?" "Longer," he admitted. "She talks about him like it's different, the way she used to talk about things that mattered to her." He looked at me steadily. "Are you going to do something?" "Yes," I said. And for the first time in a long time, I meant it without reservation. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my home office until 2 in the morning going through documents I'd been quietly organizing for months. The Southern Ember financials, the patent filings, the acquisition offers. I opened the most recent letter from Cornerfield Foods, a national brand that had been pursuing Southern Ember seriously for 6 months. Then I picked up my phone and sent a text to my oldest friend, James Pratt, who had spent 20 years as a business attorney and now ran his own firm in Raleigh. "I need to talk. Sooner rather than later." His reply came at 6 in the morning. "Lunch tomorrow. My office." Over sandwiches the next afternoon, I told James everything. The affair, the 2 months of my son covering for his mother, the $7 birthday card, and then I told him about Southern Ember. James sat back in his chair and looked at me the way a man looks when he's recalibrating what he thought he knew. "You've been sitting on acquisition offers. 3 of them. The most serious is from Cornerfield Foods. They want the brand, both patents, and a licensing agreement on the smoking process. I've been negotiating the structure quietly." "How serious?" I slid the draft term sheet across his desk. James studied it. His eyebrows moved in a way I found satisfying. "Marcus, this is 4.8 million. I confirmed. He looked up. "You didn't tell Sandra. She never asked about it. She made assumptions about what I was capable of and stopped looking." James was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you want to do?" I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the DoorDash card. $7.42 remaining. I set it on his desk between us. "I want to finalize the Cornerfield deal, and I want to know everything there is to know about Langley Development Group." James studied the card. Then he looked at me with the particular expression of a man who has seen a lot of divorces and is recognizing the specific kind of clarity that arrives right before one. "I'll make some calls. But there's something you should already know. Brett Langley has been under informal scrutiny from the State Banking Commission for the past 8 months. There are questions about how his development projects are getting financed. Specifically, whether the property appraisals supporting his loan applications reflect actual market values. Meaning there's a serious possibility that Brett Langley has been inflating appraisals to secure loans he otherwise couldn't qualify for. If that's what's happening, we're not talking about a messy divorce. We're talking about bank fraud." Something settled in me. Not excitement. Something quieter than that. "Does anyone own significant stake in his financing structure? Outside investors?" James nodded slowly, seeing where I was headed. Langley's flagship project, the Meridian Commons development downtown, has outside equity investors. Small group. One of them has been looking to exit quietly. The project's been delayed 6 months, and they're nervous. How much to become a meaningful stakeholder? He told me the number. It was less than I expected. Then let's move forward. The following 8 weeks were the busiest of my life. I finalized the Cornerfield Foods acquisition, $4.8 million, plus a royalty structure that would pay out over 10 years. I established a holding company, Ember Group LLC, and through James's network we acquired a 15% equity stake in the Meridian Commons Investor Group, enough to warrant a seat at the table when questions arose. At home, I maintained the routine. I made dinners. I helped Ava with her reading exercises. Her brain worked in patterns, and once you understood that, she was extraordinary 9 years old and already making her own hand-drawn maps of imaginary countries, labeling every city in careful block print. I watched Tyler run his Saturday morning route and told myself that every mile he ran was a mile I was running alongside him towards something better. Sandra barely registered any of it. She was rarely home before 9. When she moved through the house like a guest who'd already checked out mentally. One evening I found her on the back porch, phone pressed to her ear, laughing in a way I hadn't heard her laugh in years. She saw me through the glass door, and the laugh cut off immediately. Later she came to bed and said, "Brett thinks we should consider selling the house. Equity's high. We could upgrade." "We're not selling the house," I said. "You never want to evolve," she said, and turned off her lamp. I lay in the dark for a while. Then I quietly got up, went to my office, and checked the Ember Group account balance. 4 weeks before the Meridian Commons investor meeting, James called with an update. The Banking Commission has formalized their inquiry. They're looking at 7 properties in Langley's portfolio with potentially falsified appraisals. The inspector who signed 3 of those appraisals lost his license last year for an unrelated violation. Someone's been using his credentials after the fact, Marcus. This is serious. Does Sandra know? A pause. She's the listing agent on 2 of those properties. I took a long breath. Is she culpable? That depends on what she knew and when. At minimum, her license is at risk if she signed off on documents supported by fraudulent appraisals without proper due diligence. James paused again. The commission is looking for someone with standing to formally request the inquiry be escalated. A stakeholder in the financing structure could do that. You've got 15% in the investor group. That's enough. Then do it. The Meridian Commons investor meeting was held on a Monday morning in a conference room on the 14th floor of a downtown office tower. I arrived in a suit I'd bought specifically for the occasion, charcoal gray, nothing flashy, the kind of clothes that say I belong here without announcing it. The other investors were developers and financiers, men and women who dealt in properties and projections. They knew each other. They didn't know me. Brett Langley was already in the room when I entered. He was exactly as I'd expected, polished, commanding, the kind of man who fills space without seeming to try. He glanced at me with the casual dismissal of someone who sees a stranger at his own party. His eyes passed over me and moved on. The meeting opened with routine business. I sat quietly through the first 20 minutes. When the agenda turned to the financing review for Phase 2, I raised my hand. Ember Group would like to raise a concern about the appraisal documentation supporting the Phase 2 loan application. Brett looked at me for the first time with actual attention. I don't believe we've been introduced. Marcus Cole. Ember Group holds 15% of this investor structure. I opened the folder James had prepared. Over the past 3 weeks, we've identified significant discrepancies between the appraised values cited in the Phase 2 application and current comparable sales data. Additionally, the licensing credentials for the primary appraiser on record expired 18 months ago. The original licensee passed away. The room went very still. Brett stood up. His composure lasted about 4 seconds. These are baseless allegations from someone who just walked in here. Mr. Langley. The lead investor, a woman named Carol Whitfield who ran the largest independent fund in the group, raised a hand to stop him. She was looking at the documents I'd distributed. Mr. Cole, are you saying these appraisals may have been fabricated? I'm saying the documentation doesn't support the values claimed, and at least one of the appraisers on record couldn't have signed these documents because he died before they were dated. I'm formally requesting an independent audit before any Phase 2 funds are released. Brett's face had gone from commanding to something I can only describe as cornered. His eyes moved around the room looking, I realized, for an ally. He found none. Then his gaze landed on me with a flash of recognition. "You're Sandra's husband." "Yes," I said. "Though that's irrelevant to the documents in front of you. This is a personal attack. This man's wife and I have a professional relationship and he—" "Mr. Langley." Carol Whitfield again, her voice flat and final. "Whether or not that's true, these documents either hold up to scrutiny or they don't." I moved to table Phase 2 funding pending an independent review. The motion passed 7-2. Brett voted against it himself, which struck everyone in the room as the action of a man who already knew what the review would find. As security was quietly summoned to escort Brett from the premises, he stopped beside my chair on the way out. His voice was low and precise. "You have no idea what you've just done." "I think I have a pretty good idea," I said. My phone buzzed as I walked to the elevator. A message from Sandra. "Brett just called me." "What did you do?" "Call me right now." I put the phone in my pocket and took the elevator down. She was waiting in our living room when I got home that evening. Sandra in a crisis looked different from Sandra in her normal operating mode. The polish was still there, but something beneath it had cracked. She was standing when I came in, arms crossed, jaw set. "Where are the kids?" I asked first. "Tyler's at practice. Ava's at my mother's." "Talk to me, Marcus." I set my bag down slowly. "Brett Langley has been filing loan applications supported by fraudulent appraisals. I brought that to the attention of the investor group I'm part of." "You're part of?" She stopped. "Recalibrated." "What investor group?" "Ember Group. I established it after I sold Southern Ember to Cornerfield Foods." The color left her face. "Southern Ember. The delivery brand." "The delivery brand, the 2 patents, and the licensing rights to the smoking process. 4.8 million, plus royalties." She sat down on the edge of the couch slowly, like her legs had decided to stop cooperating. "You sold it without telling me. You never asked about it." I sat down across from her. "Sandra, you walked past my office for 4 years while I built something. You had opinions about everything I did, every choice I made. But you never once sat down and asked what I was actually working on. You decided what I was capable of and stopped looking." She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was stripped of its usual authority. "What happens to Brett now?" "The Banking Commission's inquiry will be escalated. There are 7 properties with questionable documentation. His Phase 2 funding is frozen. Depending on what the audit finds, he may be facing criminal charges." I paused. "And depending on what your involvement looked like on those 2 listings, your license may be at risk." "I didn't know," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word. "I didn't know about the appraisals, Marcus. I swear. I believe you. But you'll need to prove it to the commission, not to me." She looked up. Her eyes were wet, and for the first time in a very long time, I saw something in them that wasn't calculation, just fear, and beneath it the particular kind of shame that can't be performed. "Is this about the affair?" I reached into my pocket and set the DoorDash card on the coffee table between us. $7.42. "This was the last straw," I said. "Not the first." She stared at the card. I watched her face move through something I couldn't fully name. "I filed for divorce yesterday," I said. "The papers are with my attorney. I'm requesting primary physical custody of Tyler and Ava with generous visitation for you. I don't want to take them from their mother. But the mother they need is the one who actually shows up." "I'll fight this," she said, but without conviction, like she was reading from a script she no longer believed in. "You can. But I have documentation of the affair, of your absences from Tyler's races and Ava's appointments. I have the financial records. And I now have the resources to see it through as long as it takes." I wasn't threatening. I was being clear. "There's a difference. Or we can do this the right way. For Tyler and Ava," she didn't say anything for a long time. "Then, you built all of that while you were building something else," I said. "We were both building. We just weren't building the same thing anymore." The fallout came fast. Brett Langley's case moved from a banking commission inquiry to a formal federal investigation within 30 days. 2 of his major projects were frozen. 3 lenders called their loans. His firm's assets were placed under review. By November, he'd retained a criminal defense attorney and canceled every public appearance on his calendar. The Fairview Gazette ran a front-page story. His own wife filed for divorce the same week. There was no quiet exit to another city, no consulting position somewhere convenient. His properties were all local, his assets all frozen, his name attached to every document the investigators needed. He had nowhere to go. Sandra's license was placed under conditional suspension while the commission reviewed her involvement in the 2 affected listings. The evidence ultimately showed she hadn't known about the falsified credentials. Her due diligence had been sloppy but not criminal, and the suspension lasted 45 days before being lifted with a formal reprimand. She lost the Langley account, which had been the centerpiece of her book of business. She had to rebuild from a much smaller starting point. Tyler came home from practice one afternoon, about 6 weeks after Sandra had moved into a rental apartment nearby. He dropped his bag by the door, poured himself a glass of water, and sat down at the table where I was going over Ember Group paperwork. "Coach Harris asked me today what my dad does," he said. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you built a food brand that got acquired for almost $5 million, and now you run an investment company, and you're still the best caterer in the county." He took a long drink. "He wants to book you for the athletic department banquet." I laughed for the first time in what felt like months. "Dad," Tyler said, setting his glass down. "Are you okay?" Actually, I'm getting there," I said honestly. "She called me last night. She was crying." "What did she say?" He thought about it. "That she forgot who she was for a while. That she forgot what actually mattered." He looked at me. "Do you believe her?" I considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think she means it. Whether she can hold on to it, that's up to her, not me." Tyler nodded. "Ava asked me if she was going to miss the school play." "She's not going to miss it," I said. "I've already talked to her. She'll be there." He looked at me for a moment. "You still look out for her. Even now. She's your mother. That doesn't change." He was quiet. Then, "I'm glad you stopped letting people decide what you were, Dad." Ava's school play was a Tuesday evening in December. Sandra arrived a few minutes before curtain, sat 2 seats down from me, and we watched our daughter play a cartographer in the 3rd grade production about explorers. Ava had insisted on making her own prop, a hand-drawn map of an imaginary continent with every country labeled in her careful block print. She held it up during her one speaking scene, and the audience laughed warmly. I heard Sandra exhale beside me, quiet and soft, the way people exhale when something hits them somewhere they weren't guarding. Afterward, the 4 of us went for ice cream at the place on Elm Street that Ava had been requesting for months. The conversation was careful, the way conversations are when people are learning how to be in a room together on different terms, but it wasn't cold. Ava talked nonstop about the play, about her map, about the explorer she'd researched and the one she wished she'd played instead. Tyler argued with her good-naturedly about whether the continents on her map made geographic sense. As we walked back to our cars, Sandra fell into step beside me for a moment, a little apart from the kids. "The Harrington Group contacted me about a catering contract," she said. "They specifically asked for Cole's Kitchen." "I know. I sent them a proposal last week." She was quiet for a moment. "You were always better than I gave you credit for. I told myself a story about you that wasn't true." "You told yourself a story about what success was supposed to look like," I said. "And when I didn't fit it, you decided the problem was me." She didn't argue with that. "For what it's worth, the card, the way I talked about you, the things I said in front of your kids, I'm ashamed of it. It pushed me in a direction I needed to go," I said. "I'm not going to thank you for it, but I'm not going to carry it either." We reached the corner where our cars were parked in opposite directions. The kids had run ahead. Sandra glanced at them, at Tyler, who was pointing something out in a shop window to Ava, patient and easy with her the way he always had been, and something moved across her face that I chose not to analyze too closely. "They're really good kids," she said. "They are," I agreed. "That part we did right." A year passed with the particular kind of steadiness that comes when you stop bracing for impact. Brett Langley's case moved through the federal system. He ultimately entered a plea agreement, wire fraud, 2 counts, and received 30 months in federal prison, plus a $500,000 fine and the permanent surrender of his broker's license. His development firm dissolved. His properties sold at auction at a fraction of their claimed value. There was no soft landing. There was a courtroom in Raleigh on a Tuesday morning, and a man who'd spent 20 years making himself look larger than he was, finally the right size. Cole's Kitchen had its best year on record. The Cornerfield deal had brought Southern Ember to 14 states, and the royalty checks that came in each quarter still surprised me in the best possible way. Ember Group had diversified into 2 commercial investments, a small stake in a regional food distribution company, and a partnership with a culinary school in Charlotte developing a workforce program for young people aging out of foster care. We named the program after my grandfather, who had run a small diner in Greensboro for 40 years and fed half his neighborhood on credit he never collected. The afternoon I signed the final paperwork to fully endow the James Cole Culinary Initiative, I drove home and found Tyler in the backyard doing cool-down stretches after a run. He was applying to colleges in the spring. His first choice had a strong environmental science program. I'd already set aside the tuition. "You're smiling," he said, squinting at me in the late daylight. "Good day," I said. He stretched an arm across his chest. "She wants to take us all to dinner after Ava's recital on the 14th. If that's okay, that's fine with me." He nodded, satisfied. Then, in the offhand way of teenagers who don't want to make a moment too big, "She's different now. Like, actually there. More present." "I've noticed," I said. "Good different," he said, and left it at that. That evening I sat on the back porch with coffee, the same way I'd sat on 100 evenings over the past year, watching the yard go dark. The DoorDash card was still in my desk drawer. $7.42. I'd never spent it. I didn't keep it out of bitterness. It wasn't a trophy. It was a marker, the exact point on the map where I'd stopped being the version of myself that other people had decided I was, and started being the version I'd always actually been. Sandra had sent me that card thinking she was noting the ceiling of my life. She had no idea she was handing me the floor. I had been the same man all along. A man who built things slowly, carefully, with the understanding that anything worth having is worth the time it takes to make it right. I hadn't needed her to see that. I'd needed to stop waiting for her to. The sky over the yard was the particular blue-black of a Carolina October evening, wide and clear, the kind of sky that makes you feel the size of things correctly. I finished my coffee. Inside, I could hear Ava moving through the house, narrating something to herself in the focused, patterned way she always did before bed. I could hear Tyler's music faint through his closed door. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't triumphant. I was something that took me most of a year to name correctly. Free. Not from responsibility or from the weight of the choices I'd made, but from the version of myself that had accepted someone else's assessment of my worth as fact. That, in the end, was the only victory that mattered.